Picture these. It's the year 633, and somewhere in the scorching Arabian desert, a ragged band of tribesmen has just done the impossible. They've beaten one of the world's two superpowers in open combat. Now, that superpower is about to hit back with everything it's got. This is the story of how a brilliant military commander turned the enemy's own strength into their greatest weakness. And it all happened at a river that would live up to its chilling name. Let me take you back to where we left off. Khalid ibn al-Walid, name that would become legend, had just pulled off the unthinkable at a place called Chains. With nothing but lightly armed desert fighters, he'd absolutely demolished a heavily armored Persian frontier army. The Persian governor, a bloke named Hormuz, ended up face down in the sand, along with his elite troops, who'd literally chained themselves together, thinking it would show their courage. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for them. For the Muslims gathering strength in Medina, this victory was nothing short of miraculous. It proved something crucial: that giant could be hurt. But here's the thing about giants. When you hurt them, they don't just walk away. They get angry. Now, imagine you're in the Persian capital of Ctesiphon. This wasn't some backwater outpost. This was one of the most magnificent cities in the world, with its gleaming white palace dominating the skyline. The Sassanian Empire had ruled for centuries, and they were used to crushing anyone who dared challenge them. So when the survivors of Chains came galloping in on their exhausted horses, bleeding and terrified, telling tales of their humiliating defeat, well, let's just say the emperor wasn't best pleased. Disbelief turned to rage in the blink of an eye. These desert nomads raiders really had somehow transformed into a proper invasion force. And the empire's response: they weren't going to just defeat Khalid, they were going to erase him from existence. The war machine began to turn, and when it did, it was terrifying. Orders went out across the empire. Assemble an army. Not just any army, mind you, but a force so overwhelming that these Arab upstarts would be crushed into the dust from which they came. The gathering point, a city called Ubula, positioned right at the head of the Persian Gulf. Ubula was absolutely massive. Think of it as the gateway to India commercial powerhouse that brought incredible wealth into the empire. The city was surrounded by thick walls and bristling with defenses. It was the kind of place that made invaders think twice before even considering an attack. To lead this army of vengeance, the emperor handpicked a general named Karin. Everything Hormuz should have been, Karin actually was. Actually was. Highborn nobleman, Chet. Decorated military commander? Absolutely. A burning desire to restore Persian honor after that embarrassing defeat. You could practically see the flames. When Karin arrived at Ubula, the city was in absolute chaos. The broken survivors from Chains were still streaming in, telling increasingly horrifying stories about how fast and ferocious the Muslims fought. But Karin didn't panic. He rallied these shattered troops, mixed them in with fresh legions, and began assembling something truly frightening. The army Karin put together was leagues beyond what Khalid had just destroyed. Better equipped, with the finest armor the empire could produce. Heavy shields, deadly horse archers, and thousands upon thousands of veteran soldiers. Karin's plan was beautifully simple. March south, find Khalid somewhere in the desert, presumably resting after his victory. Use overwhelming numbers to crush him against the wasteland, and send his head back to Ctesiphon as a trophy. Simple, effective, brutal. The giant had woken up, and it was absolutely starving for revenge. But here's where things get interesting, because whilst Karin was busy assembling his massive army, he'd made one critical miscalculation. He assumed Khalid would be doing what any sensible commander would do after a tough battle: resting, recovering, dividing up the spoils. That's what any normal general would do, right? Khalid ibn al-Walid wasn't normal. One of Khalid's greatest talents wasn't his swordsmanship or his tactical brilliance, though he had both in abundance. It was his intelligence network. The man had scouts everywhere, absolute ghosts, moving through the desert, watching the roads, slipping into border town markets, listening, learning, reporting back. Before Karin's army had even finished assembling at Ubla, Khalid knew exactly what was happening. He knew the numbers. He knew the threat. Now, pause for a second and think about this. You've just fought a brutal battle against a superior enemy. Your troops are exhausted. You've got wounded men to care for. What would you do? Most commanders throughout history would retreat deeper into the desert, make the enemy chase you, stretch out their supply lines until they're vulnerable. It's textbook military strategy. Khalid did the exact opposite. Why? Because he understood something crucial about time. Every single day he waited, Karin's army grew stronger. More troops arrived. More supplies stocked. More defensive preparations. Completed. The longer this went on, the more impossible the task became. So Khalid made a decision that must have seemed absolutely mad to anyone watching. The most dangerous course of action was, paradoxically, the only path to victory. He had to strike immediately. He had to hit Karin before the Persian general was ready to move. Can you imagine the scene? Soldiers still nursing wounds from the previous battle, being told to mount up and ride north. But they did it. They moved with that characteristic speed that would define the early Muslim conquests. Fast, relentless, unstoppable. They bypassed fortified positions, ignored the main roads, and surged toward Ubula, like a sandstorm racing across the dunes. General Karin must have nearly fallen off his horse when his scouts came racing back with the news. A massive dust cloud approaching from the south. Rapidly. The Arabs weren't retreating. They weren't hiding. They were attacking him. The man scrambled to deploy his army outside Ubula's walls. He chose a battlefield near a major waterway historically identified as a large canal of the Euphrates. The locals had a name for it, a rather ominous one. The River of Blood. Remember that name? It's about to become very literal. Now, Karin made a tactical decision that would prove absolutely fatal. Perhaps overconfident in his heavy infantry. Perhaps trying to use the same psychology as those chains in the previous battle. He positioned his entire army with their backs to the river. The theory wasn't completely Madif. Soldiers have no route of retreat. They'll fight with desperate courage, right? They've got no choice but to stand and win. The problem: it only works if your army maintains discipline, and it only works if you're still alive to command them. The Persian battle line was genuinely magnificent to behold. Rank upon rank of glittering steel armor, perfectly disciplined, radiating imperial power. Karin took the center position, flanked by two other mighty generals Qubad, and only these were the empire's finest. Opposite them stood Khalid's force, smaller, less armored, dust still clinging to their clothes from the rapid march. But there was something in their eyes, something unshakable, and Khalid himself surveyed that Persian line, looked at the river swirling behind them, and recognized what Karin had done. The Persian general had built a cage for his own men. Khalid just needed to lock the door. The battle opened and the ancient Tradician champions stepping forward. This was the moment for individual glory, where commanders could prove their valor in single combat. The Persians, burning to avenge Hormuz, rode out from their ranks. Karin himself, along with his wing commanders Qubad and Anushayan, bellowed challenges to the Muslim line. The entire battlefield fell silent. This was theater. This was legend being written. Khalid didn't hesitate for a second. He rode out to meet Karin in the center. Two of his toughest lieutenants rode to meet the wing commanders, and what happened next was brutal and shockingly swift. Khalid was a master swordsman in his absolute prime. He parried Karin's opening strike-heavy blows from a man in thick armor. But then, with a movement almost too fast to follow, Khalid closed the distance, and within moments, Karin's Empress chosen instrument of vengeance lay dead at Khalid's feet. Simultaneously, on both flanks, the other two Persian generals were cut down by their opponents. In the span of a few heartbeats, the entire high command of the Persian army had been obliterated. They hadn't even thrown a single spear yet, and their leadership was gone. Can you imagine the terror? One moment, you're part of an invincible imperial army. The next, your generals are dead and a bloodied sword is being raised as the signal to charge. The Muslim army surged forward as one unstoppable wave. The Persian army, leaderless and suddenly terrified, buckled under the initial impact. Discipline that had held empires together evaporated into pure panic. The instinct to flee took over. But there was nowhere to go. Behind them roared the deep waters of the Euphrates Canal. The front ranks tried to hold, tried to push back, but the rear ranks were being pressed against the muddy riverbanks, and panic was spreading like wildfire. What had been a battle transformed into something far more horrifying, a compression. The Muslim forces, operating with precision and relentless pressure, pushed that disorganized mass of ironclad soldiers toward the water. Thousands were cut down on the banks. Thousands more, weighed down by their heavy armor, that same armor that was supposed to protect them, were shoved into the river and drowned. The waters turned red, carrying the broken remnants of Imperial might downstream toward the Persian Gulf. The River of Blood had earned its name. This wasn't just a defeat. It was total annihilation. And when the dust settled, Khalid had done more than just destroy reinforcements. He'd captured Ubula, itself that great commercial port, that gateway to India. The spoils were staggering. Gold, weapons, Arabian horses that would fuel the next phase of the campaign. The gate to Iraq, to the heartland of the empire, had been kicked wide open. But Khalid understood something crucial. Ctesiphon wouldn't take this lying down. The sleeping giant was now fully awake and absolutely screaming with rage. The next army they sent wouldn't be led by a disgraced governor or an overconfident general. They'd send their absolute best. And that battle, well, that's a story for another time. So, there you have it. 2 battles, 2 crushing victories, and a military commander who seemed to operate on a completely different level from everyone else. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most brilliant military campaigns, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories from the past. Trust me, what comes next makes this look like a warm-up. See you in the next one.